So we are all here. It is 1 minute past 11 where I'm at. So we're going to just go ahead and get started. Just so for everyone here who's, typically here, we've changed up the formatting of these AMAs a little bit. I think you guys are going to like it, and, we will tweak it as needed. However, I just want to give a brief introduction into what this will kind of look like and what you guys can expect, and then we'll go straight into Chris. He wanted to give some comments and talk a little bit about kind of the journey ahead, and we'll go from there. So the AMA has typically been me kind of reading off updates and then kind of talking to everyone here on stage a little bit about what they're doing, and then going to community questions. It's still fairly similar, but instead of me just reading off updates, I'm really going to have the team who's working on those pieces. I'll ask them questions and they will respond to those questions, and they'll also have free range to just talk about what they're doing. That way, we can kind of make this more of a traditional AMA versus us just talking at you. If you guys do have questions, we'd love for you guys to just drop those into the game questions channel prior to the AMA in future AMAs, and we'll get them added to the list. And we'll be able to address them that way. And we'll also have time on the back end of these calls to take questions like we typically do. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass the mic over to Chris and let him give his introduction and some updates.
Cool. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk briefly about what I had shared. I imagine most of you saw it, but if you haven't, I shared some background on kind of our journey, and especially over the last 6 to 9 months. This was on Saturday, and it was, I guess, by way of an apology. We've been making efforts in the past, to give estimates on timing, and I think it was in April that we had said delivering by the end of the September. By the end of the summer was our goal. Obviously, we're let's say a day away from the end of summer, and it's not here. And I apologize for that. But I kind of talked a little bit about why that was, and I think the general feedback from the community was you would all be happy for more transparency, maybe a little bit more of a look at what it is that is blocking us, where there's complexity, and having a little bit better understanding of that journey. And so I think it's a great point, and I want us to all make an effort to do that. And so I did share some on Saturday, and again, for those of you who weren't there, I talked a little bit about the things that occurred kind of since those estimates that changed things, the kind of unexpected surprises and the increase in complexity that we were unprepared for, or we just underestimated. And I said then, and I'll say it again, it's not an excuse. If I had not felt comfortable because of uncertainty around these things, I shouldn't have set a date, or should have set a different date. But just an explanation. So in general, there have been a couple of things that have led to this delay. I think one of the main issues was the largely unexpected need to shift from Cairo 0 to Cairo 1. That was not something that we went into building Influence expecting, and it was still largely an unknown in the first portion of this year. So having to do that, in reality, probably cost us 6 weeks. Now, I'd say we are in a better place now. Cairo 1 is far and away a better language, and certainly it puts us on a firmer footing with better foundation going forward. But the reality is that it did push our timing back. The other piece was, I'm sure some of you remember, all of you remember, in the phase 3 testnet that we were partnering pretty heavily with Cartridge on their wallet. A lot of cool features there. We were really excited about session keys and the experience for kind of the Web 2 native user getting into Web 3 via Cartridge. Unfortunately, cartridge is no longer supporting their wallet. And so we've had to scramble a little bit to try and identify like what is our path forward there. We have, I think, built now a really great partnership with Argent. Great team. They're allowing us to speak our mind quite freely on product roadmap, and they are listening, and we are moving forward together, I think, pretty well in building out a wallet experience that will be very approachable and attractive for new Web2 users. So with their web wallet, we're actively working with them on session keys. I think we will get to a point that we have a really great wallet and really great partnership. But again, unexpected. Maybe it should have been expected. Maybe I should have had a little bit better judgment there, but that did cause some delay as well. All that being said, again, apologies for giving overly optimistic estimates, but we are still working away to deliver the game that we promised. We're working as quickly as we can. We are making great progress, and I hope that nobody in the community doubts our level of effort, because it is high. We are, as we've communicated before, very quickly coming up on what we're calling a limited mainnet release. That's going to be allowing you to bridge your assets. It's going to be allowing you to do the potentially long delayed scanning that you haven't wanted to do on L1, as well as recruiting those Adalians and recruiting the RVEC crewmates, putting those crew assignments in stone, and having the information about their traits and the titles and departments that is all relevant to actually making the decisions. So we're pretty excited about it, and it's going to have the new client. You're going to get to play around with all the travel. You're going to have a lot of information about the processes that Proto's been working on. We're getting very close on like having abundances balanced and giving you insight into that. So I think a lot is happening, behind the scenes. All the contracts are deployed. All the data is seeded. So like we're, from a contract point of view, live on mainnet. We're still in the process of hooking up the client and the server, but that's going very well. Indexer is going well. Search is going very well. It's very performant. We're kind of in the middle of back and forth trying to refine exactly what we want to be searchable, but it is all going quite well. The bulk, I would say, of the complexity, obviously there's work to continue hooking up these systems for pre-release and ultimately for launch. The bulk of our complexity right now, I think, is in the in kind of our commitment to be a non-custodial game. We don't want influence to be taking control of your assets, and that's including like the core NFTs, which are asteroids and crewmates and ships, as well as Sway, the ERC-20. And so we've been very, I think, deliberate about a design that allows for all of the really cool like market functionality, trading functionality, even trading of those NFT assets in game with Sway. We've been very deliberate about having that all be fully non-custodial. We don't even have the game itself asking for an approval, and not just not asking for an infinite approval like you often see, but asking for any approval this way. So it's all very oriented towards this being non-custodial. You keep control of all your assets, and it's all very forward-looking towards influence, the vision of influence existing without any centralized entities support. So I think most of the complexity is there, and specifically it's around buy orders, so limit buy orders, but we are making progress there as well. And I think it's absolutely a hurdle we will overcome and continue pushing through such that we will be ready for launching the game with 4844/Volition. At this point, likely 4844. So a bit long-winded there, but I just wanted to give some background. I'm also happy to take some questions about this either now or later. But in general, just my way of saying I'm sorry for our what turned out to be overly optimistic projections. And I will do my best to make sure I'm communicating openly and transparently to the community from here on in, to make sure you're all very well aware of what's left for us and what launch will look like.
Chris, if I
Yes.
may, just tag along with that real quick. I love the clarity and that you just provided. I just think it's worth underscoring the communication aspect as well, and just kind of a little. I am like super big on transparency, and I love doing these AMAs with you guys because it allows me to, I think, explore that kind of transparency in this small studio fashion that it's not it's very different from, I guess, how other kind of big studios I've worked for come into play. So with regards to that specifically, the communication around what you just said, how you were trying to explain everything that happened last weekend, and how we were specifically talking about that this week, how like, hey, you know that one AMA ago when you were sick, I was like, you know what, we're gonna get asked the hardball questions because the end of the summer is approaching and Chris is sick and he's not there to explain things. So that's just like really refreshing to hear. And I will reiterate, I think we're gonna try and use this Discord. We're going to be here. I know there's a balance between, us all working our butts off right now just to try and finish this thing, trying to get all the parts buttoned up, and we want like heads down time. But at the same time, trying to be out there and, sticking to answering your questions. So like even the hardball questions about that you might not feel comfortable asking or whatever. So we're going to be there in the Discord, or at least I will be there and try to answer as much as possible for you guys and provide as much transparency as to precisely the stage of development that we're at with this thing.
Yeah, Sergey, thank you for adding. I had a few things I wanted to follow up with for Chris to provide as much clarity to the community as possible. And with the dates for Volition changing for StarkNet, Chris, can you maybe speak to a little bit about EIP 4844 and Volition and what we're doing to ensure we're not, just pushing the game out because Volition might be pushed out?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, we've always maintained that it's either, and that's still the case. 4844, for anybody who is not aware, briefly, will likely reduce the cost of storing data on rollups by about 10x. And it's pretty substantial because right now, all of our transactions the cost is dominated by storing data. After that, with that 10x reduction, we will no longer be dominated by data storage, and in fact, it will be the portion of the transaction related to the actual computation, the interesting part of the game, will dominate at that point, which is, there's trade-offs there. It's good and bad, but we actually have a lot more control over optimizing compute, and so we can drive down the costs more easily there once storage costs are sort of removed as much of a concern. Volition is not a mainnet change. It is a change on L2, and effectively what it does is say, rather than having all of this data that gets written to the chain be saved to L1, we save it somewhere else. In this case, initially, it'll basically be the StarkNet node operators that are storing that data for you, but not also sending it to L1. That can be much, much cheaper on the data side, potentially 100x, which is great, but it's also not strictly necessary for us because, like I said, with 4844, already our data costs are going to be lower than our compute, and so it makes perfect sense for us to be launching at that point. It should already have us in a quite a low transaction fee situation that should be attractive given the pace of influence for anybody really to come play. Mm-hmm. So we aren't waiting for both. we're waiting for 4844 because without it, we feel like the transaction costs are too high. If for some reason that gets pushed out longer than it should, we might just launch anyways. I don't want to make everyone wait forever. But I think the game is best served, our community is by far best served to be able to launch into that like low fee environment where even people who are not all that familiar or not familiar at all with crypto could play and have fun and not sort of suddenly start worrying about transaction fees. That is something they've never really done before. So that's really my hope and my goal.
Yeah, I'll just to add again too. I think the important thing for me to look at with this thing is both of these are mainnet fees. We have these two upgrades coming down the pipe that are going to be cheapening upgrades. Both of them cheapen the cost to do transactions in the game, but that is kind of separate actually from having a playable game with a playable client, all the other work that goes into it, and playing that game on testnet where essentially, you know, you're playing with funny money. This isn't the actual launch version of the game. And hopefully just to underscore that testable version of the game is unblocked by both of these. We do want it to be cheaper. We do want when the actual release happens, we want it to you know, not to be a huge barrier of entry to people who have to pay a bunch of gas fees and stuff like that. But that shouldn't stop those of you guys probably here in this audience, the core community, from experiencing what the game is like and giving us your honest take on, hey, is this a cool, I think, new groundbreaking, maybe new way of playing MMOs that's fun. We'll all get to be able to go in there and send off our transactions and have a cool testnet launch with basically not girly, but I think it sounds like it's going to be Sepolia ETH, right? But the fees on that test network will not matter, right, Chris?
No, they won't. Not at all. I mean, it's very easy to get Sepolia ETH right now, and even if it's ungirly, we are the holders of a large amount of girly ETH, and we will happily distribute it around so everybody can play quite easily. So yeah, I think like that's going to be a very carefree environment to play and start getting feedback and really understand like if we're balancing correctly in the lead up to basically our wait for 4844. We'll all be waiting together and playing together, waiting for 4844 to come out, and then we'll be ready to go.
So, Chris, I'm going to probably move on to Sergey here in just a second, but I thought maybe one more question to help maybe explain further kind of the data versus compute. Do you have anything you could potentially add so that it's maybe easier to understand that difference? Like what do you mean by the compute and why is that such a large factor for cost?
Sure. I mean, it's not right now, and that's sort of the point, right? So if I can give you some example numbers, our heaviest transaction right now, or not transaction, but game action, it's actually 2 transactions, is actually processing products. So when you go to, for example, like refine some raw material into a refined material and have that delivered to a warehouse. That's one of the heaviest computational game actions we have. And I believe, sorry, I keep clearing my throat. I'm getting over COVID. That's why I wasn't there last time. But that costs around 130,000 Kairos steps, which probably means nothing to anybody, and that's fine. What that costs roughly right now on the L1 side is about 1,300 gas. That's the rough translation today. That won't hold true long term. That'll actually go down over time, which is awesome. Basically, the more that StarkNet is used, the more people are using it, more transactions flowing through it, that will actually go down. Which is a really cool feature of ZK rollups, and I'm excited about that feature. But keep in mind that 1,300 gas, because now when we look at storing data, and I mean literally like storing one value, one number, storing that one number. Well, if you store it on L1 today, it costs about 21,000 gas. So storing that one number on L1 is costing you, nearly 20 times as much as doing this like interesting computation that we do for influence, where a whole bunch of different things happen. You've got materials moving from a warehouse to a refinery, calculating how much it should actually refine based on your crew, based on how well fed they are, whether they're rationing, their traits, the classes that are represented on the crew, and then making sure that that distance is, first of all, on the same asteroid, calculating the time it takes for the materials to get from A to B and then from B to C. There's a lot going on. And all of that is like a 20th of what it costs right now to store a single number on L1. Now, for the rollup, StarkNet today has already cut that down in cost pretty significantly. At worst, it's a tenth. So at worst, it's about 2,000 gas to store a value. At best, it's more like 1,000, so 20th. But even that's high. If you think about the fact that like storing one value is costing as much as all of that interesting computation. So you can see that with 4844, now that 2,000 gas, that 1,000 gas that it's costing for us to store data from L2 onto L1 goes down to 100 or 200. And so now you can see that like we can actually store a bunch of data, and it still doesn't cost as much as our compute cost. So it gives us a lot more tools then to be able to say like, okay, well, maybe we can do things more efficiently. We can drive down the costs of compute, but that's a little bit more under our control. And so having those data storage costs go down is great. And then furthermore, with Volition coming along after that, it may be that we keep our NFTs, we keep the ERC20 on this rollup mode. So it costs a little bit more, but we get that extra security. But then we could then see another 10x reduction in the cost of storing data with Volition for sort of like the in-game data. So now you're talking like 10 or 20 gas. Now it's effectively nothing. And so we are wholly dominated by compute. Again, kind of a good problem to have because now we can optimize, we can drive that down more easily. And like I said, ZK rollups have this awesome feature where you can start to recursively prove things. And as those blocks fill up and StarkNet feels comfortable, basically feels comfortable that there's enough transactions that they can, batch them once an hour to L1, and those are filling up more and more, then the cost of compute also goes down. So I think in general, we will be starting in probably the highest cost environment that we'll ever see with influence, and it should just go down from there. But I still want to make sure that we start that highest cost somewhere that it is attractive enough for users to actually want to play and not be worried about fees.
Thank you. I think that clears up a lot of the I mean, gas is confusing. We're not used to these terms, so I appreciate you clarifying what that means and why data is so profound and why we need it to go down in terms of cost. Moving on to more gameplay and building influence, I know that Sergey has been working really hard on a lot of different projects, but more specifically, I wanted to ask you today, your work on the crewmate creation flow has been going on for quite some time, and I know it's a big part of the game. I think you want to talk about that, maybe even share, if possible. I think everyone here would love to see more of the game, and I know that this would be still in mock form, but I think this would be pretty valuable. So I'll just give you the stage here, Sergey.
Yep. Thanks, JP. And yep, I was going to dive in and show you guys basically this is something I've been working on with Proto and other folks a bunch, and this is our flow for the first steps in the game that will actually be, hopefully just a few weeks away. when we launch our limited release, because limited release is going to have again, limited functionality, but a lot of cool new functionality. But with that comes the ability to, number one, take your assets to L2, then go into L2 and begin creating Adalians. Now, you won't be able to do much with those Adalians, but this is the steps that we will, then kind of move forward with as effectively the new player experience that we are going to launch the game with. It's going to have a bunch of other I'm sure wikis, and we want videos and other stuff like that, but this is our most compact form of, I think, guiding people through in a way that doesn't involve like a super lengthy tutorial, which we also don't have the manpower to build right now. That's for later down the line. But I wanted to actually walk you guys through, and yeah, again, this is mock-up form, and these mocks are actively being developed right now. But we do have, this is kind of like the visual guide to the way we want to do this. With that being said, I am going to hop in a screen share, and it is a fun little tree that actually comprises a decent number of steps. It's been fun working on going through and figuring out where all of these decision points for players, when they're going to reach them, and what we're kind of technically bounded by. But we have a pretty good idea now. So I'll walk you guys through. Proto, feel free to chime in as needed. But yeah, I'll just begin at the very beginning. So you're gonna go. So the game right now has a menu, but this begins after you get past that initial kind of splash screen when you are effectively when you've clicked the big explore button. And what explore simply means is go into our game without logging in. So the cool thing about influence is, yeah, you can browse, you can see the whole, the belt, you can travel around it. You don't even, you can travel it perfectly anonymously without even logging into the game, which is cool. But as soon as you want to take the next step, actually sign up for an account and want to try and interact with the game somewhat, you're going to go in through here. So we already have this. You guys have probably seen some version of this at test phase 3, but we have this big button. It's going to be in the place of where your crew's captain would be if you were actually playing, but this is the viewpoint of a non-logged in user. So they would click this large button that says log in. It says, you can browse, but once you've clicked that button, you're going to be taken to the next stage, which is, hey, this basically log in with an existing account or create account, kind of similar thing, but we've tailored it to Web3 so you can have external wallets. And we're also going to be utilizing this email powered wallet abstraction with Argent, which won't actually, that part is coming in later, but this is kind of like a mock of what the future will look like. But for the initial limited release, you're gonna hook up your Argent or Bravos wallet. There is there's some logic gates here. Now it's interesting, after you've logged in with an Argent or Bravos wallet, basically there's a bunch of checks here that says, hey, does this wallet already have someone? Does it have a crew? Do I detect any influence crew related assets? If it does, you basically move into the non-new player part of the game, which is just play with your existing crew. But if it doesn't, this is where we ferry people along to the next phase. Now, this is, again, through the eyes of a brand new person who's just created a brand new account or signed up with a brand new wallet that doesn't have any influence assets. They will be greeted with this screen. This is just the simplest, most tutorialized form of saying, hey, influence, if you want to play influence, you need crewmates. They do all the stuff. Crews perform actions, and a crew needs to have at least one crewmate. Crewmates are not free. I think this is the model that we've been going with for a long time, and I think it's actually brilliant and pretty fair. But crewmates are $5 a piece, bare minimum. In order to play, to interact with the game world, you're going to need to spend at least $5 or 0.003 roughly ETH, plus some. We're gonna lump in a little bit of dust for gas fees to buy your first crewmate, and then you can move on with the flow. So this is the window that says, hey, you want to buy a crewmate? You're going to start with one crewmate, but you can buy as many as you want, and they're basically given to your account as credits, which you can claim. So if you wanted to buy a 5-pack immediately of crewmates, you can do that there. Just $25. Move on to it. So now with that crewmate purchase out of the way, players are brought to this next decision point, and this is where we realized, okay, before you go into customizing, naming, etc., your crewmate, there are a couple other things that need to be set up first in the world where locations matter, where crewmates need to live at a habitat, where crews are kind of like born into this starting habitat location. So you're going to need to we will prompt people to make a choice, and we're trying to make this choice as easy as possible. So the choices for your starting habitat, where do you want your crew to be born, essentially? 2 choices. One is pick for me. We're going to have an automatic selector that picks a habitat on Adalian Prime. We haven't quite figured out exactly how, but we're leaning towards, like, I think the least populated hab maybe to auto select, or a random hab, or somewhere. It doesn't really matter, actually. It's not a permanent choice because your crew can move around to any of the available habs. But we just wanted an easy choice for new players to be like, hey, pick an automatic habitat for me. But the second choice is pick for myself. If I wanted to, kind of like pan around the asteroid, look at all the possible different starting locations. If I'm a little bit more advanced, again, this is where the player can look and see, yeah, maybe I want to start in some other habitat that either we set up or other players. This list would include all the player made habs. So basically, picking the pick for myself thing would bounce you back to the view of the whole asteroid, and it would enable just a very short elastic search with the query of all starting habs that have, I believe, like no rental fee, right?
Yeah, it needs to be
There's a bunch
public.
of, yeah,
If you don't want
precisely.
people spawning into your habitat, you can set it to private or limit the set of people who can do that.
Yeah. So you'll immediately be greeted with an asteroid with a bunch of basically pink blobs, and pink blobs represent like a positive search result. So it'll be only habs are highlighted. You click one of the pink dots, you go down to the surface. It shows you the name of the starting habitat, and you have to press this button, which says, hey, I want to recruit a crewmate, a crew here, like start here, basically. So this would be the custom habitat starting flow. Moving on down, this is another decision point that's not relevant for new players, but for existing players, it will be. For players that have maybe a lot of several crews, several crewmates hanging out, and you're just recruiting, you want to just like add on top of a crew, it is possible. We have to give people the choice to, I'm not just going to create a new crewmate and put them all as the captain of their own crew, because that could create a lot of scenarios where you just have a bunch of empty crews laying around, that have temporarily been minted with a crewmate on them, and then you move that crewmate on to rejoin, the crew that you actually want them to be on. So this dialog basically allows you to check, and it says like, hey, do you have any other crews at all at this habitat? And then give you a choice like, hey, this crew's got one crewmate, 4 open slots. Hey, maybe I want to mint them onto one of the open slots in this crew. This crew's only got 1 more open slot. And basically give you the option, hey, either create a new crew, brand new crew with with this crewmate on it, or recruit to an existing crew. Okay, so next up, we're going to proceed after you've done all these selections where you want to mint. All these things are basically answering the question of where. You move on to the next phase, which is who. And there's this whole process. We have to treat Adalians and the existing Arvadians separately. Existing Arvadians, because they are somewhat pre-minted. Basically, they're bridged from L1 to L2. They have a preset appearance. They have a preset class. They have a bunch of stuff. So for the Arvadians, you get a slightly separate flow that says, first of all, pick the Arvadian that you want to initialize, and this is where you get a chance to confirm, as we mentioned, all the story choices, the traits that you may have already picked before, but we're going to give you a chance to redo them. this is the place where you do it. So this is the finalization step for our audience.
Hey, Sergey, just to interject really quickly here. So this, what you're looking at, is basically replacing what is currently there on L1, where you select your RVAD crewmate, and this is kind of where that starts. And you know, if you have 100 crewmates or something like that,
yeah.
Picking traits will be right after this.
Yeah, precisely. We already have that screen, kind of like this is a little bit slightly updated UI flow for a window that looks more consistent to all the rest of the stuff. So you have Arvadians right here, and in the event that you're minting a new Adalian, which is basically everyone from now on will be in the Adalians, you will be dropped into this version of the flow. So I'll just move ahead with the Adalian version. They're going to be very similar, but basically you're greeted with this. So now that you've picked the habitat, now this is your crewmate story. You can move ahead. You do all the same story mode selections for your new Adalian, which determines the kind of traits they get based on your, choose your own adventure thing. However, now we've added this skip story button, which we've already, I think, previewed a little bit. If not, ta-da, it's there. If you have a lot of crewmates and you don't want to make the same decisions over and over and over again, I'll show you later, but you can basically skip the whole thing, and then we just go to a simplified UI selection where you can just pick your traits if you don't want to read the same story over and over again. With story out of the way, you get treated to this screen, which is, again, a slight revamp, but a lot similar to the existing screen that used to be there. This is the finalization screen. This basically says, okay, based on your story choices, this is the crewmate that you are about to mint. It just shows all of the relevant traits, their class, their collection, which is always going to be Adalian from now on until we start exploring other collections. But they're going to have traits. And you're still going to be able to customize their appearance, give them a name. Here is the option to, again, if you were, for whatever reason, this is going to bring you back to that trait customization screen. For whatever reason, you're unhappy with the story mode choices you made, and you don't want to go back and go through the whole tree and figure out which decision points you had to have done differently or whatever. We're going to make this easier for you. We're just going to have a button that says unlock traits, and then all of these traits, that unlock traits button is going to warn you. It's going to warn you. It's like, hey, you made certain story mode decisions, and this is going to invalidate them because, if you really care about role playing and the history of your character, this is going to wipe that. I mean, you're basically going to go into manual trait selection mode, but at least it's there. You can manually pick whatever ones. If you don't like a righteous character or whatever, you can pick them. This will also allow you to pick the impactful trait if you didn't, for whatever reason, want to switch that out. You go through this selection, which is this is basically a one-off. I'll show you guys later, but we have like a little mini one-time purchase thing where you can just spend $5 or 0.003 ETH immediately to purchase the crewmate if you didn't buy credits earlier, because there's like a quicker loop if you just want to basically add to an existing crew, which happens from this screen. Or sorry, 2 screens down from here. But I'll show you guys how that interacts. You basically, so if you're happy with your crewmate here, you hit confirm. If you had a credit that was already existing there, you just hit the recruit button. All you do is pay the gas, and that crewmate is minted, and you get this celebration screen that says, "Hey, here is my crewmate. I just created. Here's his name. He's a scientist. He's an Adalian." And from here out, there's the next CTA button, which just takes you to your crew. So you have a crewmate here, and the kind of this is the terminus of the whole flow, which I showed you guys, and this is the gateway to basically the rest of the game. But you end at the crew screen, and it shows, oh hey, here's the crewmate that I just minted. Now they are part of a crew. This crew has a log. I can do a bunch of stuff here. Suddenly you're like, oh, there's food. My crewmates need to eat. This will hopefully be a good starting off point for the rest of the game for a lot of people. So now you have this on the HUD. You have a crew. They have a location. They have food. They're ready to go. And in the event that this is your very first crewmate, the Adalian crewmate that you just minted, you will be shown that, oh, hey, a crew has 5 slots. If you wanted to add to this crew, you can click any one of these plus buttons. And that plus button is basically backs you out to this stage right away, where like you can just loop and create new crewmates as needed, and all you have to go through is this quick confirmation. Provided you've got enough of the L2 ETH to make the transition, then it should be very, very simple from here to basically fill out as many of whatever characters you need, and then you can be on your way and start out with a crew and doing influence things.
Hey, Sergey,
yeah.
To follow up on this, this is a lot to show, a lot to take in. I'm sure people are garnering some information from it, but could you maybe give a little bit more insight into why, the crew creation and crewmate, recruitment is such a complex design problem, and why we've spent quite a bit of time on it?
Sure. I mean, I guess a lot of this was going back and forth in design discussions of when we want to prompt certain choices upon people, and kind of trying to be sensitive with what's the best way not to overwhelm people as they get into the game. This is all, I mean, a lot of this replaces effectively the tutorial, and we not only have a game that runs on like a totally different monetization system on a totally different network, and it requires cryptocurrency to function. In addition to that all that stuff to take in, we have, because of that, actually, our game's core design functions a certain way, and it has to, and we have to teach people about all of these basic things before they can get into the game and start playing. So actually, yeah, a lot of this flow is figuring out what are the fundamental concepts in influence, and in which order do they need to be presented to players who are starting out for the first time, and then can we skip any of them? And for example, like this is a good example of like some sort of design iteration at work. When we first started talking about this flow, we were trying to see if we could force. So some of these early decisions are like where your crew starts, going to the habitat. The location-based decisions, we thought like, hey, can we just shove that to the background? I really was like, okay, the really fun part is jumping right into here, jumping into the creation storyline, the lore, the stuff that explains about the Arvad and the Adalians. Like this is kind of similar to, I guess it also matches the way that a lot of other games or MMOs will start out. Like you do your crew creation, you don't worry about what your starting town is, essentially. In a lot of other MMOs, there is just a starter town, and you get plunked down in the middle of it, and you can immediately like character creation there immediately goes to the juicy bits of selecting your appearance and traits and stuff like that. We also have the story mode, which is, I think, really, really cool, and that also sort of sets us apart, because other typical RPGs or MMOs, I think, toy with that in varying amounts, but usually you make your story as you play. And for us, we have this cool like backstory generator, basically, because you launch with a bunch of traits, but the backstory generator takes up some non-insignificant time during character creation. But basically, we thought maybe, hey, can we just do this? If you're a brand new player, instead of surfacing the whole like all the habitats on Adalian Prime and where you can be born and stuff like that, can we just surface this? And we determined after a bunch of iteration that like, no, we can't because of the way the game mechanics are set up. It is important and actually I think more fair to players to say, you know what, before you go into character creation mode, you actually need to know a little bit about how this game is played, and this game is played based on crews that contain crewmates that venture out from a habitat because it's got life support systems, and they'll go perform various tasks. So in order to and we had to preload, and of course we had to preload the purchasing of the crewmate. So all this stuff ended up falling into place. But it started out with, of course, like, hey, can we just like get them to reading a fun story? And ended up with, no, first you need to make an account and log in. Then you need to buy a crewmate. Then you need to pick where that crewmate's going to be born. Then you can get to the fun story. But hopefully this will all be vindicated because, you know, this is the product of a long design process, and I think now it makes sense. But of course, there's only one like way to actually get out there and test it and click through all the things and see if this flow is okay and reasonable. And hopefully we did a good job with words explaining every single decision that players have to make that gets them from the start all the way to like a functional crew that they can go out and do stuff with. But yeah, hopefully that was a
yeah, no, I think that's
good
great.
role.
You know, I think I know we only have limited time on this call, and we could ask a lot more questions on this, but I want to make sure the community gets some time towards the end of this. So to put a pin in this for now, I'd like to go to Proto and just, you know, ask you more specifically on, you know, the balancing of production chains and, you know, how it's like modeling resistors in parallel and why that's, you know, impactful for the community to know about.
Sure. In case you can't tell, this is a question I fed to JP to ask me.
Yeah.
So basically, the work I've been doing, you know, with the balancing has had to focus a lot on the production chains specifically, because balancing the asteroid spectral type abundances requires that we understand what the actual demand for all those raw materials will roughly be from the entire economy as it's functioning. And so I've been having to work a lot with the product. And just to give a little quick insight into one little snippet of that process, imagine, if you will, you have a product that has several different processes that can manufacture it. You know, so just as a quick example, like say you have hydrogen, which amongst many others, you can mine it obviously from an asteroid. You could also produce it with electrolyzing water. That's one of the two outputs of that. Or you could also produce it with methane steam reformation, which is another process that takes steam at high temperatures and, you know, splits methane into various things, including hydrogen. And so there's three different ways in this limited example where you could get hydrogen. And so the question really sort of is how do you understand how much hydrogen in the economy will be coming from each of those different processes? How do you sort of weight, you know, so say like, you know, is 80% of hydrogen going to be coming from mining, or is it, you know, 20%, and how much from electrolysis, how much from steam reformation, how much from all the other processes that produce hydrogen? And understanding that is really important to understanding the actual cost of producing hydrogen, because, you know, all those different processes themselves have different costs in terms of time that it will take you to produce hydrogen. And the way I've actually been approaching that is with sort of an analog to electrical engineering, and specifically to resistors. So just as a quick primer, like when you have a circuit, if you have several resistors, which are little circuit elements that kind of take electricity and have some resistance, which is like a sort of, you can think of it as like how small the pipe is, and if it were water, basically it's like slowing down the flow of current through that in a certain way. Basically, if you put several of those resistors so that they are kind of next to each other, with current flowing from the top and then through several resistors at once, and then out again in one place at the bottom. The question is like, what is the total resistance of that system? and how much current is flowing through each of those resistors. If you have a certain amount of current, say like 1 amp, which is just a unit of current, like how much is flowing through each of those individual resistors based on their resistance. And if you think about it, that's actually quite similar to the question of if you're going to produce 1 unit of a product, how many of the upstream processes will each will be producing parts of that single unit of the output. You're sort of asking that same question. And so I've actually modeled it in the same way, where you have, quote unquote current, which is like a unit of the product being made, and then the resistance of each of those processes is how expensive that process is to run, based on the cost of the inputs and then the cost of the time to run that process, or that M value of per unit, how long does it take to run. And so what this allows us to do is to basically figure out a rough estimate of how much of the economy is flowing through each of those upstream processes to make that one product, which then let us see, relatively speaking, how much comes from each one, and then the overall cost of the downstream product that you're looking at, that you're trying to calculate the cost of. So it's just an interesting little analog there, where you can sort of picture money flowing through the economy as being the same thing as electrons flowing through a circuit. And things that are harder are more resistant, have a higher resistivity, and things that are cheaper are less resistive, have more current flowing through them. And so I think, obviously that's an analog, but I think it's going to be a pretty decent little model for assisting me in doing the balancing. And obviously there's a lot more to it than that. How do you handle secondaries? How do you handle various other things like that, which are trying to go into that model. But that's just sort of the basic approach there. And I think you guys will be really interested probably to see. I'll be sharing some of the results of this balancing with you guys pretty soon. And I think you'll be pretty interested to see like where all the different products fall in terms of estimated costs, in terms of estimated amounts that will be flowing through the economy under certain assumptions. There's just a lot there. So just a little bit of insight into what I've been working on.
So with that, because we don't have that much more time, I really want to open up the floor for the community to come up on stage. I know that Kimmy, if you're still here, I'm going to bring you up in just a second, and we can discuss your questions more specifically. I just want to note that I think we were a little long-winded today in terms of the introduction, and I think it was very appreciated. Thank you, Chris, for coming up and actually giving some insight on the delays and what things look, what we're looking at ahead. And that won't be as much going forward. We'll be able to really get into traditional AMAs where we ask questions, or I ask questions to the team, you guys ask questions to the teams, and we just get to go back and forth, and it's just a quality conversation rather than being kind of just talked at. So that's really what I'd like it to be. So yeah, let me go.
Yeah, I'll try to keep my time shorter next time.
I think
Sorry.
no, there's no issues here. We just want to continue to improve and provide you guys a space that really feels like you can enjoy and learn. So Kimmy, I just sent you an invite. Come on up. All right. Yeah, I see you here.
Hey guys. First of all, thank you very much for answering our questions and the transparency and the way you received our complaints. It's very motivating to see how you guys take this stuff. So I got a couple of questions that I think will help me and a lot of other people understand the future of the game. First of all, let's say that by some miracle, StarkNet actually does, what is it called, 4244 or whatever it's called, and it comes out in Q1. Okay, gas it's actually less by 10x, and here comes April. How long would it take us to move to that system? Would it take like 6 more months for us to actually use that system? How long would that process take approximately?
That's a good question. And also, thank you for asking your question on Saturday. That prompted my response.
My pleasure.
So, two things again. There's 4844, which is driven by Ethereum. So that will be deployed by Ethereum. Right now, we're expecting December or January. That one decreases the cost of storage by about 10x. That one requires literally no change for us. StarkNet has already done the building required to be compatible with it. So, admittedly, it might be a week or two. They that they wait to deploy that. But as soon as they do, and basically that's deploying a new L1 StarkNet contract. And as soon as they do that, it works. We don't have to do anything at all. Literally 0 code changes for us to take advantage of that. And we'll see that 10x reduction. The other part, the volition part, which I expect will come after that, and that one is on StarkNet to deliver, and would then provide a further 10x cost reduction, or up to 10x. That one does require a small code change, but we have already written Influence to be compatible with it, and I think it would be a grand total of probably 4 hours of work. So in both of those cases, I think that we get to take advantage within days of them being available. So I'm really not worried about that at all. I'm more just stressed watching them develop them and hoping that they adhere to their timelines.
Of course. Okay, great. So now we got the near future solved. Let's look more into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other developments that we need from, whether that's Ethereum, the main network, or from StarkNet, to deploy the next stages of Influence, whether that's discovery or what is it called, exploitation, or forgot what it's called.
Conflict.
Yeah, a conflict. Yeah. I'm asking this just so we all have an idea of whether, the delays that happened before, the bottlenecks basically were not something in our hands. It was the networks we're using. If that's going to happen again in the future.
I don't think so. I don't think we need anything else. The primary complexity, the primary R&D that we will need to do, and that I think even the space as a whole needs to do, is hidden information. Yeah, which exactly. So basically, that's the idea of using zero knowledge proofs, not for zero knowledge rollups, which they are zero knowledge, but actually that's almost not the point. Zero knowledge rollups are cool because they allow you to mathematically prove that transactions are valid instantly, rather than waiting for these optimistic rollup fraud proofs. But in fact, we actually want the data to be visible. That's why we talk about, rollups, the blob storage and volition, and we worry about 2-week deletion of data, is because we actually want the transaction data to be available. Well, now we're talking about actually hiding that. And we can already do that in a lot of cases. Like, for example, we could say, all right, well, we're just going to hide all of your inventory information into a hash. But then we have to address the issue of, okay, every time you want to do something with your inventory now, you have to be able to submit all the data for all of your inventory so we can prove that you have all of that and it hashes correctly. So there are already quite a few hidden knowledge approaches, but there are challenges there. One of them, and this one, I think there's a very clear example in what we want to do with Influence. If you imagine ships flying around, and we said the ships will always be visible, you'll always be able to see them, but you might not know anything about them. You might see one going from asteroid A to B, but you have no idea if it has weapons on it, how heavy it is, what ship type it is, who's flying it, etc. The issue there is that if we want to have like this cool scanning mechanic where you can basically do some espionage and figure out who's where and where they're flying, and it's a really cool game mechanic. Well, now we have to find a way to force that player to reveal the information about their ship. And there's a lot of approaches to that. There's like economic approaches where basically you get slashed if you don't reveal it. There's something which is actually quite new in the field called multi-party computing. That might be a solution, but I think that's the main field of research for us as we get closer and closer to discovery and especially conflict, is that hidden information.
And that's because
outside of that, I think we have a pretty well defined look at what we need from StarkNet. It's there. Wallets are going to be a continual sort of evolution on the UX, but we feel pretty good about everything else.
Okay, great. Thank you for the answers, and I appreciate the hard work you guys are putting into this game.
Thank you. It was great questions.
Yeah, it was great. I'll just add, and hidden information, such a cool blockchain concept that people just take for granted so much on standard centralized games, right? Because what's hidden on a standard centralized game from the other players is 100% visible to the centralized server controllers, right? They just don't give that information out because there's one server in the middle of it. But with decentralized blockchain games, you have to have a mechanic. That information is yours. We have to somehow, right? You have to penalize someone or somehow make them give up their information, which is 100% under their control because that NFT is 100% under their control.
Yeah, it's sad, I guess, but like these are most of my shower thoughts. Hidden knowledge.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge factor to having a fully decentralized game where the studio can no longer be in control, and the game just functions without us making it function that way. There are some advantages to centralization and using traditional architecture, but that is not the direction we're going in. So these are fields of research that I assume Proto and Darkos will spend many of hours looking into.
And I think this is, although there have been ups and downs with StarkNet, that's part of the reason why we chose them. That they do still have, I think, the greatest concentration of researchers and scientists that literally built zero knowledge proof technology, and they have offered to help. They will help. They're supportive, and so I think that we will crack this ultimately, and have a clear path to hidden information in a world where influence is fully decentralized and can exist without reliance on oracles, which is really really one of the main efforts and one of the main areas that adds complexity, right? I would even be willing to depend on oracles in some cases as long as it is very clear and certain that there is a way past that. There's a way to decentralizing and getting rid of those oracles over time. So in this example, we could be that hidden knowledge provider as an oracle, as long as I was certain that we could move past that. And so that's kind of always in the back of our heads when we're thinking about how we're building influence and what we can actually incorporate as a dependency.
So we're pretty much at time here. I don't want to just cut it off, but I think there were quite a few questions. Some people showed up late, but maybe it might be helpful, Chris. There are some pieces and parts to limited release that are not listed in the bullet points that make up what is actually there to do, that I think players will find pretty interesting. So things like choosing habitats, things food, whatever it might be. Do you want to maybe run through a few of those things? Because I think that's not what most people are expecting.
Sure. I mean, I think, where are the bullets?
Sorry. This was in previous write-ups in announcements, but we have the main meat and potatoes is being able to bridge assets, mint crewmates, the main features there. But there are other features that had to go into that to make these main ones possible, which will also be able to be experienced in client at limited release.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the biggest ones, right, is being able to play with travel. You're going to have the ability to play with the 4 simulated ships. The escape module, light transport, shuttle, and the heavy transport, and kind of get a better understanding of what traveling around the belt will really look like. And I know we've shared some about those porkchop plots previously, but now you get your hands on them and you get to play with that, experience the new client. We have, I think, a much deeper search capability that's going to be present in this new client as well. And like JP said, your crewmates are going to actually be in habitats in the building itself, which you'll see. You're also going to you don't need to actually start caring about food yet. Your crews are all going to be fully fed as of time 0 when the game starts, but it's at least exposed, and you can start to get an idea of the the fact that food will have an impact. You know, your crew starting to ration will actually have a penalty. So yeah, there is a lot of cool little things here and there. Also, when it comes to wallets, we are implementing and will almost certainly have the web wallet, the email login implemented via Argent when we're in limited release, which I think is really exciting. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested to try that out. I think it's actually a pretty great experience. But yeah, there are a lot of cool things. I mean, to an extent, these are all parts of the submerged portion of the iceberg that you're kind of not seeing. A lot has gone into limited release, which all pays dividends for pre-release. That had to be there, but you won't quite see all of the benefit of that until pre-release. But a lot of it is there. The entire system, how we deal with obviously building buildings, because like a building was built, so that had to be done in the same way that we will be doing that with pre-release. The way that the agreements and policies system works is in, although you can't start creating agreements and policies, it's in there. And the habitat that you'll be minting your crewmates at is set to public, as it will be when the game is launched for real. So there's a lot in there, and I hope that you all enjoy kind of discovering those things. And we will be pushing more into limited release as well as we are leading up to pre-release. Anything that is not dependent on the actual launch of the game will be pushed into limited release as well. So that'll probably include things like annotations for like your crewmate and your crew events, or your asteroid events. You'll be able to start like filling out that story in the lore, potentially chat, things like that aren't necessary, that aren't dependent on the game starting. We will make sure are included in the live mainnet client as well, even prior to pre-release.
Yeah, thank you for that. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for showing up. We are going to close this out. We're already a little bit over. And if you have any other questions, drop them into game questions. And then just a reminder, guys, we'll continue to do these bi-weekly. But the format, I'd love to change up a little bit more to have some maybe questions preloaded. And those questions can come either from our team or from the community. So just drop them into game questions and just say, hey, question for the AMA, and I will add it to the list. I have a document right now that I'm already saving these things to, and we will make sure to address them as much as possible. So less of a read off of updates and more of a conversation. Granted, it does require a little bit of effort from you guys to have those questions ready. And we will make sure to try and make these more fun, especially as the game starts to become playable. We can talk strategy, we can talk tips, we can talk about unexpected, exciting emergent gameplay that we didn't know that would be there. That's all going to be really fun. So thank you again, and really have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's go.